It is 4:30 in the morning in 1959, and the loading dock is alive with the hush of adolescent voices, the thud of newsprint bundles, cold breath hanging above Schwinn handlebars. In this fleeting window, thousands of frontline pilots set out, canvas bags slung over narrow shoulders forming a synchronized dawn patrol that transforms silent streets into the neighborhood pulse. The day's news travels not by algorithm, but by the weight of fresh ink, the snap of a rubber band, the unmistakable thwack against a sleeping porch. For decades, this ritual was the connective tissue of entire communities, a bridge between newsroom and doorstep, youth and adulthood, trust and information. But by 2026, that human rhythm has disappeared, replaced by the frictionless silence of digital notifications. How did we lose the Paperboy, and what vanished with him? Inside the depot, the morning begins not with sunlight, but with the muted shuffle of sneakers and the low hum of anticipation. Rows of bicycles lean against the wall, handlebars slick with dew, while clusters of kids, some still blinking sleep from their eyes, gather in loose knots. Canvas bags slung over their shoulders. The air is thick with the scent of newsprint and cold metal, punctuated by the distant rumble of a delivery truck. When the back doors swing open, a surge of bodies moves as one toward the stacks of bundled newspapers, each carrier grabbing their share with practiced hands. Bundles are torn open, papers folded swiftly, rubber bands snapped into place in a rhythm that needs no words. Every movement is part of an unspoken choreography. The depot manager calls out route numbers, and the frontline pilots, the youngest workers in the information chain, fan out, checking route cards and counting stacks. The oldest kids show off their speed, folding entire bundles in under a minute, while newcomers fumble but watch closely, learning the ritual by imitation. Saddlebags bulge with the day's headlines, straps biting into narrow shoulders. No one lingers. The clock is always ticking toward the first porch, the first thwack, the first sign that the neighborhood is waking up. Out the depot doors, the fleet launches almost in formation, bikes gliding into the blue-black quiet, tires whispering over pavement, breath clouding in the cold. Each carrier knows their route by heart. The shortcut through the alley, the barking dog at the corner, the porch with the loose step. In these first minutes, the city belongs to them alone. The dawn patrol is more than a job. It is a pulse that connects every street, every household, every paper tossed onto a waiting stoop. The ritual is precise, nearly sacred, and, for a brief window each morning, these kids are the living wire of the neighborhood. A paper route was never just a straight line on a map. It was a puzzle, a miniature economy mapped out in alleys and driveways, each turn and shortcut learned through trial, error, and the quiet advice of older carriers. City planners might have drawn the blocks, but it was the paperboys and girls who learned how to shave minutes off the ride, how to balance a canvas bag heavy with headlines, and how to keep the papers dry on a sleet-soaked morning. In the 1950s and the 60s, the baby boom filled neighborhoods with a ready labor force. Suburban streets became arteries for information, each one assigned to a teenager entrusted with the daily news cycle. Routes rarely stretched beyond 5 miles, but they demanded precision. Route cards listed every address, porch, stoop, or mailbox, sometimes with notes like, "Beware of dog" or "Fold extra tight." The most coveted skill was the no-look toss, a flick of the wrist that could arc a folded paper from the curb to the porch without slowing the bike, all before the sun crested the rooftops. John W. Miller, age 12, took on route number 19 for the Grand Junction Daily Sentinel. His territory was 112 homes, each expecting their paper before breakfast. Miller rode a sturdy Schwinn, its frame streaked with newsprint, saddlebags straining under the load. On a good month, he earned $55, money that felt like a fortune to a kid, equal to about $500 today. Every dollar was the product of early mornings, icy handlebars, and the constant calculation of the fastest loop. The bicycle itself was a badge, Schwinn or Murray, balloon tires battered from curb jumps and sudden stops, gears worn smooth by the daily grind. This was a job that taught more than punctuality. It demanded route optimization, customer memory, and the grit to finish before the school bell. Every carrier became a small business, responsible for their own ledgers and collections, their success measured in minutes shaved, routes conquered, and porches satisfied. The Paperboy economy was as much about hustle as it was about headlines, and its rhythms shaped a generation of young entrepreneurs. Porch lights flicker on as the first papers land, each delivery announced by a sharp thwack, sometimes a hollow echo on wooden steps, sometimes a muffled thud against a rubber mat. That sound, unmistakable and precise, was the morning's unofficial starter pistol. The paper itself felt alive in your hands, thin weekday editions, crisp and quick, barely weighing down the canvas bag, Sunday bundles swollen with inserts and comics, demanding both arms and a careful toss. The weight difference was measured not just in ounces, but in the ache that settled into your shoulders by the time the last house was reached. Ink hung in the air, an invisible cloud that clung to skin and clothes, marking every carrier with a scent that lingered long after the route was finished. On cold mornings, the aroma sharpened, mingling with frost and the metallic tang of bicycle handlebars. Fingers blackened with newsprint. Each fold left a smudge, a signature of work done before most of the world had even stirred. Rubber bands snapped tight around each rolled paper, their twang a steady counterpoint to the shuffle of feet and the creak of bicycle pedals. A good toss was an act of muscle memory, the arc calculated so the paper landed square and did not spill its secrets across the yard. Sometimes a dog barked, sometimes a neighbor waved, but always the ritual continued, house by house, block by block. The morning's sensory tapestry was woven from small details: the chill of dew on grass, the rasp of canvas against denim, the faint rustle of headlines waiting to be read. For a few quiet minutes, the world was measured by the next porch, the next thwack, the next breath of ink and cold air. These were the anchors of habit, the physical cues that turned news into a daily ceremony and stitched the carrier's presence into the fabric of every street. Collection day arrived not with the rush of dawn, but with a knock at the door and a practice greeting. Once a month, the Paperboy's job shifted from silent courier to neighborhood accountant. Instead of tossing headlines from the curb, he stood face to face with each subscriber, ledger in hand, repeating a script learned by heart. He would say, "Good evening, Mrs. Jensen," collecting for the Sentinel. A dollar bill traded for a smile, a receipt scribbled in pencil, and sometimes a reminder about a lost dog or next week's church bazaar. This door-to-door ritual was more than a transaction. In a world before direct deposit and digital paywalls, trust was built one doorstep at a time. Each collection was a handshake ledger, an unspoken agreement that news would keep coming, and that the boy on the porch would keep showing up, rain or shine. For many households, the Paperboy was a familiar face, a regular pulse of the neighborhood, carrying not just the news, but the quiet assurance that someone was looking out for the block. On these rounds, the carrier became a messenger and a listener. Subscribers shared news of a new baby, a lost pet, or a suspicious car idling down the street. Sometimes a tip pressed into a mittened hand was less about service and more about gratitude for the watchful eyes that passed by each morning and evening. Stories from former homeowners recall the comfort of knowing the Paperboy would notice if a paper piled up or a porch light stayed dark. In these brief, routine exchanges, a web of informal oversight stretched across lawns and hedges, an early warning system that bound neighbors together long before group texts and security cameras. Collection Day was the heartbeat of this network, a living reminder that the morning news was never just about headlines. It was about the people who delivered them and the trust that traveled with every folded page. A paper route offered more than a paycheck. It was a crash course in growing up, delivered block by block. Each carrier became the chief operator of their own tiny business, responsible for more than just the thwack of the morning news. The job paid between $2 and $5 a week in the 1950s, a sum that felt substantial to a 12-year-old, enough to buy a new baseball glove or save for a second-hand bike. But every dollar had to be earned, tracked, and sometimes even chased down. At the end of each week, a battered ledger came out. Columns of names and addresses filled the pages, each payment carefully penciled in. Carriers learned to balance their books as faithfully as they balanced their bikes, recording every nickel collected and every subscriber who came up short. Mistakes were not just numbers, they meant coming up empty when it was time to settle with the depot manager. The route taught lessons that stuck. It showed how to plan ahead for a rainstorm, how to budget for a new set of tires, how to negotiate a missed payment without losing a customer. Some enterprising kids saw opportunity everywhere. The steady churn of new riders fueled a mini boom for local bike shops. Saddlebags, once an afterthought, became a badge of honor, with shops offering reinforced straps and extra pockets for the serious carrier. Word got around about a new brand of handlebar grips or a basket that could hold an extra dozen Sunday editions. Even the simple act of folding a paper became a kind of signature, tight enough to keep the news dry, loose enough to toss with a flick. Reliability mattered most. A carrier who missed a porch or left a paper in the rain risked more than a complaint. They risked losing their route to someone waiting in line at the depot. The job demanded early mornings, cold fingers, and the quiet pride of knowing that, for a few hours each day, the neighborhood pulse beat in time with your own effort. These routines shaped more than a work ethic. They shaped a sense of identity, one small delivery at a time. By the late 1970s, the world outside the front door felt different. Headlines about missing children and rising crime began to seep into living rooms, shifting the mood from trust to caution. The phrase, "stranger danger," echoed on evening news broadcasts, and parents who once waved from the porch now watched the clock, counting the minutes until their kids returned. Neighborhoods that had thrived on the free-range rhythm of the dawn patrol started to tighten their boundaries. Newspaper companies, feeling the pressure, quietly rewrote the rules. No more pre-dawn departures or solitary rides in the half-light. Delivery routes moved to daylight hours, with some papers insisting carriers work in pairs, two kids pedaling side by side, their bags swinging in sync. In certain towns, parents pulled their children from the job altogether, worried that the risks outweighed the rewards. Memos from circulation managers began to circulate. Buddy requirements, daylight-only policies, and reminders that safety came first, even if it meant fewer routes filled by the neighborhood's own kids. The old ritual of the lone carrier, gliding through quiet streets before sunrise, faded into memory. In its place, a new figure appeared. Adults behind the wheel of idling cars, headlights sweeping over driveways as they tossed papers from rolled-down windows. For some, it was a necessary adaptation. For others, it felt like the end of something vital. One former carrier, recalling his last route in 1979, remembered the silence that followed when his parents said no more. The bike gathered dust, the mornings grew quiet, and the pulse that once connected block to block lost its beat. The shift was subtle at first, but it signaled a deeper change. A neighborhood pulse grown faint, replaced by caution and the hum of engines at dawn. By the mid-1980s, the afternoon edition was in freefall. In 1950, there were 1,450 afternoon daily newspapers in the United States. By the early 1990s, that number had collapsed to just 546. The after-school ritual of the Paperboy, once as regular as the evening news, began to vanish as television sets flickered to life in living rooms across the country. Cable news and the rise of 24-hour coverage chipped away at the urgency of waiting for headlines on the porch. Families now gathered around glowing screens, not ink-stained pages. Newspaper companies responded with mergers and consolidations. Chains like Gannett and Tribune swept up smaller titles, centralizing printing in distant hubs and eliminating overlapping routes. The local depot, once a hive of adolescent energy, emptied out. Routes that had stretched only a few blocks were redrawn, now spanning miles and demanding the speed of a car, not a bicycle. Dr. Elena Ramirez, a media historian, traces the industry's retreat through circulation audits and corporate memos. She points to the shift in revenue streams, classified ads, and evening editions once the lifeblood of local papers dried up almost overnight. With fewer editions to deliver and shrinking ad budgets, the economic engine that powered the Dawn Patrol sputtered. The death of the afternoon edition was not just a scheduling change. It was the first tremor before the digital quake, a warning that the printed daily was living on borrowed time. The last print edition arrives in silence. Porches that once caught the thwack of a morning paper now stand empty, dew gathering where headlines used to rest. In 2026, the digital-only switch sweeps through major publishers like a cold front. No bundles at the curb, no rubber bands, no reason for a kid on a bike to ride the block before sunrise. Karen Liu, a veteran circulation manager, drafts the internal memo that reads, "Effective July 1st, all home delivery will transition to digital access. Physical distribution ceases after Sunday. There is no ceremony, just a password reset and an inbox alert." For loyal readers, especially older adults, the change lands with a hollow weight. The ritual of reaching for the paper, feeling its crisp edge, and sharing a quiet moment over coffee is replaced by a glowing screen and a silent swipe. Within months, publishers report a 10 to 15% drop in total readership. The steepest decline comes from those who depended on the porch delivery. A generation for whom the daily paper was more than news, it was proof that the neighborhood still pulsed with life. The empty stoops and vanished headlines leave a gap that digital notifications cannot fill. As the last carrier clocks out, the search for a new kind of morning begins, one that tries to recapture the tactile connection lost in the rush toward the digital desert. In a quiet corner of Portland, the morning ritual flickers back to life, but on a different scale. Sarah Patel, founder of the Daily Dispatch, starts her route not at a depot, but in a cramped kitchen, stacking 4-page bulletins, each one folded by hand, each headline chosen for neighbors, not algorithms. By sunrise, she is pedaling an e-bike loaded with the day's news, weaving between parked cars and garden beds, the soft hum of her motor replacing the whir of a Schwinn chain. Her route covers just under 1,000 subscribers, each paying between $12 and $20 a month for the promise of a real paper on their doorstep. This is no mass-market operation. The Dispatch and its cousin, Morning Memo in Austin, run on small teams and smaller margins. Their bulletins printed on thick stock that resists the morning dew. Delivery is not a race against the clock, but a return to the slow choreography of the porch drop, the handwritten note, the neighborly wave. Subscribers gather for monthly meetups, coffee in hand, print in pocket, recreating the sense of community that once pulsed through every block. The analog morning has become a boutique luxury, a deliberate antidote to the digital desert. Yet for all the care and craft, these revivals remain sparks in the darkness, bright but few, reminders of what it felt like when the news arrived wrapped in human presence. Now, the morning ritual is weightless, news flickers silently onto glass, and the neighborhood pulse has faded to a digital hum. As free-range youth work vanishes, so do the daily human exchanges that once held communities together, one collection day at a time. The analog morning is a status symbol. but its lessons in grit and connection, once routine, are now rare. What fills that silence is up to us. Share your memories below.